Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, particularly tonight when you're recognizing Ross and David and John, all three individuals who I know, and all three individuals who I think exemplify the importance of public life while building a powerful private life in the province and in the country. It has been, was a great benefit for me to be able to serve in various elected positions, but I can tell you without citizens like David and John and Ross, governments would not be able to accomplish the positive things that they can in our lives and with our lives. It's important, I think, for us in British Columbia, in Vancouver, in British Columbia, and in Canada, to recognize how fortunate we are in this world. And one of the things that happened for me when I went to the United Kingdom is I discovered a whole new world. And it's a much bigger world than I think sometimes we remember. And the three recipients tonight have always understood that. They've understood Canada's international role as well as the example that we can set. Now, for me, when I got to the United Kingdom and I was serving as a High Commissioner, I can tell you people would say hi and they say, "What is a High Commissioner?" And honestly, most of you probably here would know that, being mayor is a pretty good job. Being premier is not bad. High Commissioner, not too sure about that. So I was at the protocol office of the Commonwealth, the office, and they, at one point someone says, "What's a High Commissioner?" I said, "Well, it's just like an ambassador." The protocol officer said, No. A High Commissioner is much more important than an ambassador." Well, of course, I wanted to hear that. Well, an ambassador gets picked up when he's going for his audience with the Queen or her audience with the Queen. They're picked up in a beautiful carriage, and they're drawn to Buckingham Palace by 2 horses. A High Commissioner picked up by a beautiful carriage and drawn to Buckingham Palace by 4 horses. I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty good. I can picture myself in the tails, and the top hat and the 4 horses, and you're clomping along the London streets to Buckingham Palace. The protocol officer looks at me and says, "Oh, you're a realm High Commissioner. You get no carriage. You get no horses." Now, needless to say, I was a little disappointed in that. A realm High Commissioner simply means that the Queen is our sovereign. She's already appointed me to go and serve as Canada's High Commissioner. Queen Elizabeth of Canada says, "Would you please go and serve as my High Commissioner to Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom?" And the Queen is smart. She knows she's the same person. So I came home, and my staff could tell that I was a little bit down. They said, "Don't worry, High Commissioner. You're a new High Commissioner. We're getting you a new car." I thought to myself, that's okay, a new car. "What sort of car did the last High Commissioner have?" I asked ingeniously. "Oh, a BMW 7, they said. BMW 7 would be pretty good, wouldn't it? I said, "That's great." So one day I'm coming home, and there, in front of the High Commissioner, the official residence, is a beautiful, rich, burgundy Maserati. I walk into my staff and I say, "You guys, you bought me a Maserati?" They said, "No, High Commissioner, that's the Italian ambassadors next door. You're getting a Ford. A Ford Mondeo station wagon." So you're hearing tonight from the High Commissioner, the first High Commissioner in the history of Canada-UK relations who actually went to his audience with Her Majesty the Queen in Buckingham Palace, driven in a beautiful Ford station wagon. But of course, that's not why you go. You go because the most important international relationship, I think, the best one we have at least, is between Canada and the United Kingdom. Now, there's no question that we have more important relations. The relationship with the United States is arguably more important, but there's no other country in the world that will do something for Canada because we're Canada. And there's few other countries in the world that Canada will do something for them because they're the United Kingdom. We have a very special bond and a very special relationship. And as we watch and look at the United Kingdom, and I think often as we watch Europe, we think we're very similar. But you know, one of the things that I discovered, you feel this as a Canadian, but I really discovered it and recognized it when I was in the United Kingdom, is that we are really the fortunate few in the world, in Canada. We have things in Canada that other places don't have. The openness we have in Canada is something that we often take for granted. The way that we work with one another, and in spite of the differences that we may have and the arguments we may have across this country. And remember, Canada, just to put this in context for you, Canada is 2 times the size of the European Union. The United Kingdom, the geographic size of the United Kingdom, is 2% of the size of Canada. It's hard for them to understand 6 time zones, and it's hard for us to really understand the differences that exist in that small island and how they use various cultural and historic things to actually define themselves. So I went to the Parliament at one point, and if you have dinner at the Parliament in the United Kingdom, you have to be sponsored by an MP. So we're there, and we're actually celebrating the Bomber Command, and there's a new monument to be made. It's a very important event in the United Kingdom. But there's an MP that's sponsoring us. So the chair of the event says to the MP, "Would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe tell us what you're doing." The MP told us where he went to elementary school. Then he told us where he went to secondary school, and that was followed by the pièce de résistance, where he went to university. I would say in my political career in Canada, I've had probably 1,000 meetings with at least 500 elected leaders. I have no idea where any of them went to school. And more importantly, I didn't really care where they went to school. I didn't care what province they were from. If they had something to offer and they could make a contribution, that was good enough. And that's normally good enough for Canada. It's something that sets us apart in a lot of ways, even from our friends south of the border. And as I was welcomed to the United Kingdom, one of the things that I recognize is although we're very big in our minds, we're not so big in their minds. So when people would say to me, "Oh, you're a high commissioner," after they got to understand what a high commissioner was, they say, "What was your last posting?" I'd say, "Well, I didn't have a last posting. I was the mayor of Vancouver." And they go, "Oh yeah, we know Vancouver, that's that place over," they just had the Olympics, didn't they? I'd say, "Yeah, that's Vancouver." And I'd say I was the premier of British Columbia. And that's when they get a squinty-eyed look. And they know that British Columbia is somewhere, but they're not sure if it's next to Dutch Guiana in the north coast of South America or whether it's in Canada. So I had to explain it was British Columbia, Canada. Now, I say all that, and I tell you that, because I can tell you when I was living here and when I was the mayor here or the premier here, there was no place in the world that was bigger than British Columbia and Vancouver, or more important. I just think as we look to the world and look to the future, what we have to recognize is we may not be the biggest, we certainly are not the strongest, but we have an opportunity to be the exemplary nation in the world, to set an example of Canadian values and Canadian principles that actually works so other people can learn from it. And we should learn from others as well. So I went through first the Scottish referendum in the United Kingdom. It was very interesting, and it goes, I think, a little bit to the challenge the United Kingdom faces. They are still having difficulty in understanding the world doesn't focus on them as much as they thought. So when we would go and talk to them about the referendum experiences we had in Canada and what they might want to think about their approach to Scotland, I can tell you that an awful lot of them listened nicely, or in my words, politely, and then, frankly, didn't pay too much attention to what we said. And it created a fair number of challenges for the Prime Minister Cameron, right after they were successful in the Scottish referendum, because he really actually lit the fuse for the next one almost immediately after that referendum. And he didn't need to do that if he'd paid attention to the messages and the lessons that he could have learned from Canada. And we can learn now, I think, from what's taking place in the United Kingdom now. And just tonight, and I think we're celebrating young people and young business leaders and people that have in the past have had the vision and the leadership to actually drive us forward and to create progress. They didn't do that by being wed to the status quo. And I think it's important for us as we look back just a year ago. If you think back a year ago, it was before the Brexit referendum, about a month before. Most people didn't think it would ever happen. If you watched the coverage, you thought, well, it'll never happen. Even on election day, they thought it will never happen. But it happened. And I think we should think about why. What happened? What took place that actually allowed that to take place? Because it was hard for most people to believe it would happen. But there's a number of things. I will tell you this, from my experience at least, it was probably one of the worst run campaigns that I've ever seen. But it was run because I believe, at least, that it started as a piece of political expedience. So David Cameron was going into an election, and he wanted to undermine the UKIP vote. So what he said was, I'll have a referendum. I'm the only person that will give you a choice. And you have to realize that that is something that really sets something in motion that he really has no control over. Once he set that in motion, he doesn't have the kind of control that he might think. Now, you could argue that he didn't think he was going to form a government. But it's still a pretty, I think, questionable call to say he was going to have it. And when you look at what happened as we went through the referendum, you would know that. After that, Mr. Cameron announced that he would not seek the leadership if he was reelected. He wouldn't run for reelection again in 2020. Now, what happened when that took place, and it's hard for us to understand this, the number of MPs in the Parliament in the United Kingdom is 650. The Conservatives had a majority, or a very slim majority, and with the Lib Dems. But when they actually got out of that, they weren't expecting to have a majority, but they got one. But by saying that he wouldn't run again in 2020, David Cameron started what was effectively a civil war in the Conservative Party. He started he put in motion the action to drive his party apart. And so you had the potential successor to David Cameron, George Osborne, who was clearly going to come if they were successful in the Brexit vote. And then you had a bunch of people that were very dissatisfied with what was taking place. And so then what happened? Then Boris Johnson said, how do I raise my visibility within the Conservative Party that I'm going to go to become leader of after David Cameron steps aside, after the election, which we may or may not win? And he said, I'm for leave. Now, there are people in politics that are really good at capturing headlines and not so good at doing anything after that. And Boris, I think, is clearly one of those people. Because Boris announced he was going to run for Prime Minister. He gave real energy to the Leave campaign, supported by Michael Gove, who was, frankly, one of the intellectual leaders of the Leave campaign. And then they were surprised by the vote. So Boris says, okay, David Cameron comes and says, I'm stepping aside. And Boris says, well, I'm running. And Michael Gove says, surprise, Boris, I don't think you're good enough to run. I'm running. And Boris says, oh, okay, I'm not running. And then someone says, well, if you're not running, maybe this person should run. And at the end of the day, Theresa May, who I would have said before that should have been the person that was leading the Conservative Party, steps forward. But the fact of the matter is they created uncertainty that they still have no control over. The European Union is still an economy that's $17 trillion. And they're actually cutting a lot of their ties with the European Union. They may think they're not, but I will tell you they are. For Canadians, I think we have two opportunities. One is to be there in spades, building the opportunities the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement represents for Canada and the European Union. They're going to want to move forward with it, so should we. It's a marketplace that we can build on our history, we can build on our ongoing commitments to Western Europe and the European Union. It will create literally billions of dollars of opportunity for Canada. We should do that. At the same time, we should be going to the United Kingdom and saying, we want to build trade arrangements with you that work for you. And we can do that. And they will be able to do that quickly with us because of the ongoing cultural and historical and economic connections that we have with them. They are not new connections with the United Kingdom. What they have to realize is, as we do that, the world is going to change for them. So we had a lot of people, investors, that would go to the United Kingdom and invest, but they were using the United Kingdom as a springboard into Europe. It's not going to be the same springboard anymore. It's not going to be the springboard that you'll find in an Olympic pool. It might be one you find in the neighborhood's yard without much spring in it. But having said that, they still have an opportunity to build an economy based on massive trade opportunities around the world. It will just take them a long time. And if Brexit goes through over the next 2 years, they then have other challenges they have to face and uncertainties they have to face. So here's where I go back to the first point that I was making about how badly this campaign ran. Right near the end of the campaign, David Cameron has a speech at the British Museum, and he says, you know, folks, we're going to be safer, we're going to be better, we're going to be stronger if we vote to stay in Europe. And the people that were voting to leave, including people in his cabinet, he said were reckless and irresponsible. The first question he had after his speech was, Mr. Prime Minister, if it is so reckless and irresponsible for us to leave Europe, why did you put it to a referendum? No answer. The second question was, Prime Minister, how do you feel about having reckless and irresponsible members of your cabinet? No answer. Now here's what I think we should learn. The politics of expedience and excuses is done. By the time David Cameron had finished, there were no political leaders in the United Kingdom that had less influence on the voters' opinion than David Cameron. Mark Carney was number one. 61% of the people said they would listen to him. If they were going to listen to anyone, they would listen to him. 36% they would listen to President Obama. 34% said Boris Johnson, who was for leave. 27% said Jeremy Corbyn, who there's an argument, well, I won't say that. 27% said Jeremy Corbyn. 23% said Nigel Farage. 20% said David Cameron. So my argument that I would put on the table tonight is his decision to do something that felt politically expedient led to a whole series of consequences that he couldn't control, and he never got back to the point where people thought, he's telling me what he really believes. And I think the politics of principle and purpose are going to take over as we move into the years ahead. And if they don't, we're going to lose the very values that we treasure. We're going to lose openness. We're going to lose tolerance. We're going to lose the economic engines that have driven us forward for the last 40 years if we don't stand for the things that we believe in. So I believe we can learn from them. I believe we can learn from that. I believe it's important for us to recognize that the real gift we have is the gift of open public debate, of standing for something, of believing in something, and then of fighting for the things that we believe in. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln said this, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty. We must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, we must think anew. We must act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country." We've had 40 and 50 years of the West being on the ascendant, of us moving forward, of us bringing people together, of us celebrating differences, of us standing for the principle of open, free enterprise and driven enterprise across the economy. We are the envy of the world, and in Canada we can be the example for the world. But to be the example for the world, we have to disenthrall ourselves. It is not 1950 anymore. It's 2017. The world has changed. We are celebrating 3 leaders tonight who have recognized change, who grasped the opportunities of change, and didn't apathetically stand aside and see what change would do. They went, and their actions shaped the changes that changed our lives. Each of us in this room can do that. And it would be a real tribute to the 3 honorees that we're recognizing tonight if we can remember their example and set that example for the next generation of Junior Achievement Award winners, set the example for the next generation of British Columbians, and set the example in Canada and the world for what we can be when we reach for what's best in us instead of looking to the back and longing for a past that never existed. Disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country and we will strengthen our world. Thank you very much. Thank you.